Okay, so get ready because today we're going to be looking into the really unsettling story of Efren Saldivar. He was a respiratory therapist who, well, he was anything but an angel of mercy, as we'll find out. So we'll be exploring all of his crimes today and really try to figure out how he managed to operate undetected for so long. And we're going to try to answer the really unsettling question of just how many victims there really might have been.
Yeah, this is a case that really, I think, forces you to confront the darker side of human nature and the potential for evil to really hide in plain sight, even in places we usually associate with healing and care, right?
Exactly. And, we've got a ton of material to go through today. We've got articles, we've got court documents, we even got some statistical analyses. So let's just jump right in. Efren Saldivar was born in Texas in 1969, but he eventually ended up in California. He graduated from the College of Medical and Dental Careers in North Hollywood in 1988 and landed a job as a respiratory therapist at Glendale Adventist Medical Center. And here's where it starts to get interesting. He worked the night shift.
Yeah, working nights, it gave him the perfect cover, really. Fewer staffs around, less oversight, unfortunately, a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it's almost like the stage was set for something terrible to happen. So walk us through Saldivar's modus operandi. How exactly did he use his medical knowledge to commit these murders?
Well, he had access to a variety of drugs, right? And he used that knowledge to inject patients with these powerful paralytics, which ultimately led to their deaths. So we're talking about drugs like morphine and succinylmethonium chloride, which were actually found in his locker along with syringes.
Used syringes. That seems like pretty damning evidence right there.
Oh, absolutely. But the real smoking gun, the drug that ultimately linked him to all these murders, was pancuronium, better known as Pavulon.
Okay, so tell us about Pavulon. How does it work, and how did Saldivar weaponize it?
Okay, so Pavulon is, typically it's used in a very controlled setting, right, to paralyze the respiratory muscles in preparation for a patient being placed on a ventilator. So essentially, it just stops their breathing. Now, imagine you're already weak, maybe even unconscious, and then this drug is introduced. I mean, it's terrifying.
Yeah, that's what makes this so chilling, right? It wasn't just any drug, it was something specific to his role. As a respiratory therapist, it's almost like he weaponized his medical knowledge. Do we know if these killings were premeditated, or were they more opportunistic?
That's a good question. There's debate on that. Some experts believe he was very meticulous. He targeted patients who were already near death and whose death wouldn't raise suspicions. But others suggest that he might have been a little bit more impulsive, that he was taking advantage of opportunities as they rose during his shifts. It's a really complex psychological puzzle, and we may never know for sure what drove him to commit these horrifying acts.
Either way, it's a very chilling thought. And you think about those patients, they were already vulnerable. They were relying on him for care. I mean, it's just a huge violation of trust.
Precisely. He deliberately chose victims who were less likely to be able to fight back or raise the alarm, right? So it's a truly disturbing aspect of this case.
So he was basically making these deaths look natural, exploiting his position, and the trust placed in him. How did this angel of death, as the media dubbed him, finally get caught?
Well, it wasn't until March 13th, 1998, that Saldivar's employment at the hospital ended. And actually, the exact reason is unclear, which kind of adds another layer of mystery to this whole saga.
Okay, so he's out of the hospital. What happens next?
Well, shortly after leaving the hospital, Saldivar confesses to a staggering 50 murders, now later. He would retract that confession, but the damage was done. It was enough to trigger a full-blown investigation.
Wow, 50 murders. That's a huge number. The police must have been under immense pressure to find evidence to corroborate his confession.
Oh, absolutely. They faced this really daunting task of proving these crimes beyond a simple confession, which wasn't easy, considering the nature of his victims and his method of killing.
Yeah, I bet. Proving someone died from an injection of Pavulon when they were already critically ill must have been incredibly difficult. How did they even go about trying to prove that?
So investigators, they really zeroed in on the fact that Pavulon can be detected in the body for months, unlike other drugs that metabolize more quickly. It was a long shot. But they decided to exhume the bodies of patients who died during Saldivar's shifts, focusing on those who were buried rather than cremated.
So they started digging up graves, looking for traces of this drug. Out of, what was it, over 1,000 potential victims? They exhumed 20 bodies. Did they find what they were looking for?
Yeah, they did. 6 of the exhumed bodies showed lethal levels of Pavulon, which confirmed Saldivar's horrifying actions and provided the evidence needed to secure a conviction.
Okay, so they had the proof, but this isn't just about catching a killer, right? This is about lives lost, families shattered. What happened to Saldivar after they found this evidence?
Well, justice, albeit delayed, was served. Saldivar was arrested, and he ultimately received 6 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole. He's currently incarcerated at California State Prison Corcoran. But here's where it gets even more unsettling. The true extent of his crimes remains a mystery.
Wait, what do you mean? He was convicted. Don't we know how many people he killed?
We have the 6 confirmed victims that are linked to the Pabulon evidence, but the actual number is still debated. Remember his initial confession of 50 murders? Well, later he claimed to have killed at least 60 by 1994, and said he quote-unquote lost count after that, but continued killing for at least 3 more years. So some experts believe the actual number could be as high as 200, based on statistical analyses of deaths during his time at the hospital.
200s? That's just unfathomable. How can we not know for sure?
Well, it boils down to the limitations of evidence. Many bodies were cremated, and decomposition can make it impossible to detect the drugs he used after a certain amount of time. There's also the question of whether all of his victims were even identified as potential cases, so we may never know the true scope of his horrific acts.
This is where it gets really heavy. You know, it's easy to get lost in the numbers, but we have to remember each one represents a life. You mentioned Jose Alfaro earlier. What happened to his family?
Well, it was devastating for them. They felt betrayed by the hospital, the place they had entrusted with their loved one's care. They filed a lawsuit and eventually settled with the hospital for $60,000. But no amount of money could truly compensate for their loss.
It's heartbreaking to think about the impact this had on so many lives. And it makes you wonder, how could this happen in a place that's supposed to be dedicated to healing? How did Saldivar manage to operate undetected for so long?
That's a crucial question, and one that has haunted investigators and healthcare professionals ever since. Saldivar's case really exposes vulnerabilities within the healthcare system, raising concerns about oversight, drug security, and the potential for individuals to exploit their positions of trust. There's a chilling quote from one of the investigators who said he was hiding in plain sight. He was able to blend in, to appear like a dedicated caregiver, while secretly carrying out these horrific acts.
Yeah, it's just a stark reminder that even in places we associate with safety and healing, there's always the potential for darkness to take root. And Saldivar's case, it really raises some unsettling questions about accountability in healthcare.
Absolutely. I mean, how could someone commit so many murders within a hospital setting without raising red flags sooner? It forces us to confront, some uncomfortable truths about human nature and the systems that we rely on to protect us.
We've talked a lot about the victims who lost their lives, but there's also Jean Coyle. She's the only known survivor of Saldivar's attacks.
Ah, yes, Jean Coyle. Her story is both a testament to resilience and a chilling reminder of the trauma that Saldivar inflicted. Just imagine surviving an ordeal like that. Knowing what he did to others, the psychological impact must be immense.
It's hard to even fathom. This deep dive into the story of Efren Saldivar has been both fascinating and disturbing. We've learned about his calculated methods, the difficulty in even detecting his crimes, and the lingering uncertainty surrounding the true number of victims. What are some of the key takeaways that you hope our listeners will remember from all of this?
I think, the biggest takeaway for me is that vigilance and oversight are crucial, even in environments that we perceive as safe. Saldivar's case highlights the importance of questioning, of not simply accepting things at face value, right? It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in safeguarding vulnerable individuals and holding those in positions of power accountable.
It's easy to feel really overwhelmed by a story like this, but it's important to remember that we can learn from it. What can we do as individuals to advocate for better safeguards and stronger oversight in healthcare?
Well, that's a great question. I think we can start by staying informed, by being aware of the potential for abuse and neglect. Even in seemingly safe environments, we can ask questions, right? We can demand transparency, and we can support organizations that are working to improve patient safety and advocate for victims' rights.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. It's not just about one bad apple, right? It's about systemic vulnerabilities and the need for constant vigilance. Saldivar's story should be a wake-up call for all of us.
Yeah, I completely agree. This case should serve as a catalyst for continued discussion and action to protect patients and ensure accountability. In the healthcare system, the search for answers and the pursuit of justice, it must never end.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the chilling case of Efren Saldivar. It's a story that stays with you long after the episode ends, it prompts important conversations about ethics, accountability, and the unwavering need for vigilance, not just in healthcare, but in all aspects of our lives. Remember, knowledge is power, and by understanding the darkness, we can better equip ourselves to fight for the light.